Hello and welcome to Economic Forum. My name is Tawanda Gudlanga. Our focus this week is on public policy, and we have invited Mr. OK Machisa, the Executive Director of from the Institute for Public Policy Analysis and Implementation. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Tawanda, and thank you, Zimbabwe.
Let's talk about public policy. What exactly are we talking about here?
When you talk about public policy, it's what the government decides to do or what it decides not to do. So basically, when you see something prescribed or not prescribed, it could be telling that this is a policy. So when you see the government prescribing it, writing it down, that this is what we would want our people to follow, it becomes a law. It becomes a rule. It becomes an order, and therefore it is a policy. So let's take, for example, the highest law in our country. That's the Constitution. That's a policy. It gives us direction. It regulates our behavior. It gives us where we should take our country to, what we should do, what we should not do. So not only the government, quite a number of institutions have got their own internal policies that guide them, regulate the behavior, regulate the operations, and how people should behave when they are doing their day-to-day professional work. So at the end of the day, we are here. You have got your policies. How do you behave when you get into this institution? It's part of the internal policies. So basically, we can say what we prescribe for ourselves to follow becomes a policy.
A government is made up by the people, yes, for the people, as it were. What is the role of the ordinary citizen when it comes to policy formulation, public policy formulation?
Indeed, the people are at the center of the policy making, policy review, and policy implementation. So when you are coming up with a policy, you are not bringing the policy for the jungle. You are bringing the policy for the people, because that policy affects the people's lives, and therefore they have to be part and parcel of its making. They have got to be part and parcel of its review, part and parcel of its implementation, and therefore you would get a lot of advice in putting together nitty-gritties of that policy when you have the input from the citizens. So you cannot then put aside the citizens, because these are the people that put together that policy. Let's give an example of our own constitution. Before it was adopted in 2013, COPAC was put together. And these were members of parliament and senators that were coming to interact with the citizens of Zimbabwe to make an input into a document that was going to regulate Zimbabwe. So at the end of the day, in 2013, we ended up having a constitution which was then put together by the citizens.
A constitution which largely then was said to be a negotiated constitution, which meant consensus was not the key there, but at least we had to come up with something. Now, let's explore more on the Constitution and probably it mirroring other public policies. Is that the sort of case in Zimbabwe where we're having to end up with policies that are crafted out of the need rather than consensus and actually agreement that this is the way to go?
I just want to give you a background of why we ended up having that negotiated constitution. Remember, we were coming from a political polarized situation, which then culminated into a government of national unity. So everything had to be negotiated. So at the end of the day, we might not say we have got the best constitution, but I think we have got a constitution that can take Zimbabwe somewhere. But basically, that is a foundation of any other policy that might emanate. And I can tell you, this constitution we actually put together in 2013 in the history of the interaction of myself with other constitutions in the region, it could be the best.
So it vindicates government's move to amend the constitution?
It doesn't vindicate at all. This is exactly why I'm saying it could be one of the best constitutions in the region. So it falls away in terms of amending it. This constitution has not really been operationalized. It has not really been, laws have not been aligned to the new constitution. And that's why we are still saying new constitution because it has not really taken off the ground, because so many things are still in grey areas. Many laws have not been aligned to this constitution. I'll give you an example. You buy a brand new Fortuner, the latest Fortuner, you put it there. And then you say, no, before I drive this car, I want to service it, I want to pimp it, I want to change the lights and all that. This car is still new. Why don't you drive it? Get to understand it and see where their faults are. But you cannot discover any fault before you have driven it. So this constitution has not really been driven to an extent that we can say it warrants amendments. So at this moment, I wouldn't be a person who would really say this constitution has to be amended. For me, I think it is the time for the parliament, for the Senate, for the government to breathe political willingness into this thing called constitution and make sure that all those laws that have not been aligned to have been aligned to this. And test your car. See where the problems are. It is my hope that the government, including the president, might really reconsider the move.
Join us after the break as we really deconstruct the policy formulation framework in Zimbabwe and how this can accelerate economic growth. Join us then. Welcome back. This is Economic Forum, and our focus this week is on public policy. And with me is Mr. OK Machisa from IPPAI, which is the Institute for Public Policy Analysis and Implementation. Before we went to the break, we touched really on the supreme law of the land, which is the supreme policy, as it were. And you were talking about the various roles, particularly that government can play. But let's delve more onto the role of the citizens in public policy formulation. Do they have a say? You talked about interaction, you talked about consultation, but is what they say taken on board whenever a policy is being formulated?
The citizens have got a role to play in the formulation of their policies. Like, for example, I gave you during the time of the constitution when it was being put together. So what happens when the Committee on Parliamentary Affairs and Justice takes a certain proposed bill to the people, like what is happening now? The amendment number 2 of this constitution, which is going to start on the 30th of March, is going to be given to the citizens. Citizens will then be asked, do you want these amendments to be put into this constitution? Citizens are therefore free to say, no, this we don't want, this we want. And this is an opportunity of our people at grassroots to raise concerns of certain issues that would want to be smuggled or that would want to be put into the constitution. So it is within the mandate of the people of Zimbabwe then to say, we are going to say, yes, this amendment, we need it or we don't need it.
Talk about the process of smuggling. We've always had analysts talk about certain aspects being smuggled into a public policy. Citizens would have had their say, other key stakeholders would have made their input, but then there is something that is then smuggled in, as it were. Just take us through the steps from the formulation to a point where a policy is then deemed law.
What happens then is that when you have this consultation, like for example that I'm talking about, the public outreach, where the parliament is going to gather information from the people, they will come back into the parliament and say, this is what we have gathered. And these are the things that the citizens would want. And then that committee is allowed to actually adjust and make sure that this is what is needed. But don't forget that the parliament is comprised of different political parties. Let's say, for example, this time, you have got ZANU-PF, which commands 2/3 majority in the parliament. Whether the people want this or that if the parliamentarians from ZANU-PF would want to push a certain way of putting together these adjusted issues that the citizens would want, it's upon themselves, because the bill is going to be put to their vote at some point. And whether you say you want it or you don't like it, what goes with the vote is what ZANU-PF wants, because it commands 2/3 majority. But what is important here, what I want really to underscore, is that if ZANU-PF is for the people, and when the majority of the people says, this is what we would want, it's rather advisable for them to go by what the people want. You get what? They might want what they think is good for them within their system, within their political party, but if the citizens of Zimbabwe say no for this amendment, they should go by that. If they say yes, then they need to go by that. But it is important to underscore what the citizens would want. Then after that, the Senate also takes, normally the Senate endorses what is there. And then from there, it goes for the signatures of the president. But it is important to underscore within the mandate of the parliamentarians to ensure that they have taken on board what the citizens want to see in the Constitution.
Looks like parliamentarians are quite key in this instance, where they also put to vote, and they then have an influence on the particular policy which would be taken up to the president. Let's talk about the ability of the parliamentarians themselves to actually interrogate, gather to start with, interrogate, and also come up with recommendations, as it were. Looking at our parliamentarians, are they up to the task?
What I know is that we have got a very competent parliament, and we have got very good parliamentarians. The only bad process that is there, we have what we call whipping. Parliamentarians are whipped by their political parties to behave in a certain manner that is not really probably liked by the citizens. So what we need to understand here is that when the people say, yes, we want this amendment number 2 to prevail, let's rise above what our political parties would want and go by what the citizens want. If the citizens say, no, we are not going to buy this, so this amendment number 2 should not proceed. Yes, all parliamentarians should go above what their political parties would want and say, this is what the citizens have said we want, and let's go by that. The only challenge is that whipping, if that whipping comes in, we have challenges. And then the whipping is mostly considered to toe the line of a political party, not necessarily citizens' interests.
But how do we then go beyond political aspirations? Do we not have key guidelines and frameworks that can be followed in the public policy framework?
Of course, there is a guideline. You cannot go and start to talk about amending a constitution when you don't have a guideline. At political party level, there are guidelines that are put there. In the event that we amend this is what we are going to achieve as a political party. If we don't amend this is what we are going to lose at a political party. Don't think this amendment is just coming from the air. No. There are technical minds that are applied to find out if I add 1 + 1, I'll get 2. Or if I add 1 + 1, I get -2. So those are dynamics that will be taking place at a political level. And therefore, when a political party or when a system says we would want to amend this, there is a certain way of gains that they will have seen. So obviously, a framework at a political party level is designed. But don't forget that citizens also have got their own framework. As raw as it, don't think citizens do not understand. So the reason why I gave you an example of a brand new car that needs to be driven before you establish its fault is what the citizens would be equating that to. Because I am in Road Lupani there, and I'm saying, why is it that this amendment is coming before 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things are done.
Join us in the third and final segment as we also interrogate on economic policies and how their impact to acceleration of growth in the country. Join us then. Welcome to the third and final segment on Economic Forum, where we are interrogating public policy in Zimbabwe. And of course, Zimbabwe strives to be a middle-income country by 2030, and certain policies have been put in place to ensure that this becomes a reality. Now, Mr. Machisa, obviously Zimbabwe, like the rest of the world, has declared the coronavirus as indeed a pandemic. We had the president making some policy pronouncements, as it were, changing. Obviously, this will obviously have an impact to even social and economic policies. Let's look at that.
The first thing that I would want to underscore is to congratulate the president for declaring our country a disaster as we look at the coronavirus pandemic. And he actually articulated policy at operational level yesterday. And I'm sure everybody is aware that we've got very big events that attract international players, like the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair, which was scheduled to come in around April. That has been cancelled and all that has been postponed. And this is very important for us to realize that the president and the government and the cabinet have realized that Zimbabwe is not living in isolation of the global playground. It is a country that may, even though we don't have a confirmed case of somebody who has been tested positive of coronavirus, but it is important to put measures that reduce possibilities of contraction, etc., etc. And the government has already set the pace, the move, that this is how the people should behave. Look at what he has actually done. We suspend all gatherings that have more than 100 people, and that alone is a step towards reducing levels of dangers. And it is important to note that, of course, it touches on your economic issues, because look at ZITF. ZITF attracts quite a lot of international traders, and this is where you actually have investors coming in here and there. But look at it has been suspended because the government has realized that the people's lives are much more important than other things. And I want also to thank the president for saying, let's divert the money that we were targeting for our independence and put it to make sure that we have stabilized this issue that is this pandemic that is going to be, and that's just an advanced thinking. And I would really think it's important to congratulate the government and the president for putting measures towards curbing the pandemic.
Well, evidently, the issue around our currency has also been the talking point, where a lot of people have been asking if really the right policies are being put in place for implementation to actually get us out of the challenges that we are in. Your overview on the economic and finance policies that are in place and their aim to actually put us out of the scenario that we are in at the moment.
I really need to stress that Zimbabwe is at a very precarious position with regards to our economic position. And our currency, our money is not buying anything. This is simply because of policies that we have just induced in ourselves, and we don't know where we are going. We're actually stuck. So I would think that the fiscal authorities and the monetary authorities, they need to be consistent when it comes to announcing or pronouncing economic policies. And at this moment, I think let's review and ensure that we have put the correct facts on the table. If our minister is very sincere, if our governor is very sincere and would want Zimbabwe to go on, it's very important for them to review whether their policies that they've put in place are going to take the Zimbabweans ahead, or we are going to be in a worse situation than where we are today. I'll give you an example that a person who is in Sholocho today, looking at 2 liters of cooking oil, which is costing 100 Zimbabwean dollars, it's likely to be worse. And when it's likely to be worse, it's important for those people that make policies to adjust and ensure that if it's likely to be worse, what is it that we need to put in place so that it doesn't become worse? We know we have got a certain pride, but let's review that pride and see whether it benefits us or it benefits the citizens. It is important for those that deal with fiscal policies and those that deal with monetary policies to look at the citizen of Zimbabwe and try to review these policies before we are
I'll put you on the spot here. Are you suggesting that we need to review our policy which says that we are a monocurrency country? Our own Zimbabwe dollar is the one that is recognized, because we've heard others are advocating that we need to re-dollarize. But the president has insisted that there is no country that can operate without its own currency.
I don't want to prescribe a solution. A solution is in the matrix. A solution is in the equation. When we had a multi-currency regime, then what was our level of happiness in terms of happiness index in our country? Were we happy? Were we sad? Were we, that? And what has happened now when we've introduced our own dollar? Are we happy? So I don't want to prescribe. I want people to understand that it is important for us to take this as a yardstick to measure the progress of our policies or retrogression of our policies. So at this moment, I wouldn't think the people of Zimbabwe are happy. Their happiness index is almost to 0.
But is their happiness well informed, or whatever they're expecting well informed? Because we've seen the multi-currency regime also having its own issues. Remember, the bond note was introduced as a way of stimulating cash in the system after the US dollar had virtually disappeared from the market after re-dollarization. Are we not getting into that cycle? Are we not going to see ourselves having a policy that is going to bite us once again as we wrap up?
Tawanda, we need to put first things first. We don't need to jump a gun here. When we introduced the Zimbabwean dollar, our productivity, was it viable or it was dead? Completely dead. Our exports, were they viable or they were dead? Dead. We are relying on import. So you put first things first when you are dealing with policies to stabilize the economy. So at this moment, I don't think we are going anywhere. Actually, we are fast going back. So my advice is, let's go back to the drawing board. It doesn't matter how costly it is going to be. Let's go back to the drawing board and see whether these policies are taking us ahead or back.
Well, we've come to the end of the program where we were focusing on public policy in Zimbabwe. And our guest was Mr. OK Machisa, the Executive Director from the Institute for Public Policy Analysis and Implementation. And of course, Zimbabwe striving to be a middle-income nation come 2030. And of course, public policy is the roadmap that will actually usher us into that status. Until we meet again, it is a pleasant viewing. My name is Tawanda Gudlanga.